Everyone asks, how much money do I need to start building wealth? Wrong question. The right question is, how much clarity do I need before money even matters? Because here's the truth nobody tells you. Adding money to confusion just creates expensive confusion. I've watched people turn $500 into $50,000, and I've watched people turn $50,000 into $500. The difference wasn't capital, it was consciousness. It was knowing exactly what smart risk looks like versus what stupid risk disguised as ambition looks like. And if you can't tell the difference, you're not ready for wealth. You're ready for an expensive education. Let me show you how to tell the difference before you pay tuition. Look, I need to be direct with you because you deserve that. You're trapped between two fears right now. The fear of staying broke forever if you play it safe, and the fear of losing what little you have if you take risks. And this paralysis, this being frozen between those two fears, it's keeping you stuck in a middle zone where you're not building anything, you're just surviving, you're treading water. And the pain, the real pain, isn't the scarcity. The pain is the decision paralysis that comes from not understanding what smart risk actually means. You've been given two terrible options your whole life. Gamble recklessly or save slowly. Take huge chances or play it completely safe. And both of those feel wrong to you because both of them are wrong for your situation. They're wrong for anyone starting from almost nothing. But nobody's given you a third option. Nobody's shown you that there's a way to move aggressively without gambling and to move carefully without stagnating. And that's what we're going to solve today. What you're about to receive is a complete reframe of risk that dissolves this false binary you've been living in. You're going to understand that smart risk isn't about how much capital you have, it's about information quality. It's about psychological readiness. It's about asymmetric positioning. You're going to see why having almost nothing is actually a strategic advantage if you understand the hidden mathematics of upside and downside ratios. And you're going to learn to distinguish between three types of risk. Stupid risk, which has high downside and low upside. Mediocre risk, which has balanced downside and upside. And smart risk, which has limited downside and exponential upside. And you're going to walk away from this video with a framework that lets you move aggressively without gambling and carefully without stagnating. Because here's what makes this different from every other Build Wealth video you've ever watched. Every other video tells you to save more, spend less, invest consistently. That's great advice if you have consistent income to invest. But if you're starting from almost nothing, conventional advice traps you in a 40-year timeline. And I don't know about you, but 40 years is too long. It's unacceptable. So I'm not giving you conventional advice. I'm showing you how to compress timelines by understanding leverage, not financial leverage like borrowing money, but psychological leverage, informational leverage, and positional leverage. The myth we're destroying today is that wealth building from zero requires either luck or decades. That's what you've been told your whole life. You either need to get lucky, win the lottery, have some incredible break, or you need to grind for 40 years and maybe you'll retire with something. Both of those are lies. The truth is, wealth building from almost nothing requires clarity about what you're actually risking and a framework for taking risks that are structurally intelligent rather than emotionally satisfying. And there's a massive difference between those two. So, let me tell you a story. Let me tell you about a guy who was working as a dishwasher. 23 years old, no college degree, living paycheck to paycheck. He had $800 in his bank account. That was it. His entire net worth. $800. And most people, if they looked at his situation, would say he had no business thinking about wealth building. He should just keep his head down, save $50 a month if he can, work hard, and maybe in 30 years he'd have something, maybe he'd have 15 or 20,000 saved up if he was really disciplined. But this guy, he made a different calculation. He realized something that most people never realize. He realized his time was worth more than $800. If he kept doing exactly what he was doing, In 10 years, he'd be a 33-year-old dishwasher with maybe $15,000 saved if he was lucky. And he looked at that timeline and said, no, that's unacceptable. That timeline doesn't work for me. So he took $600 of his $800 and he spent it on a 2-week coding boot camp. Not college. Not a 4-year degree that would cost him $100,000 in 4 years of his life. 2 weeks. 2 weeks of intensive learning. And to most people, this looked absolutely insane. You're going to gamble 75% of your net worth on a 2-week course? What if it doesn't work? What if you can't learn it? What if you waste that money? But he understood something that most people don't. He understood he wasn't risking $600. He was risking the opportunity cost of not knowing how to code for the rest of his life. Let me say that again because this is crucial. He wasn't risking $600. He was risking staying a dishwasher forever because he was too scared to invest in himself. His downside, his real worst-case scenario, was that he'd spend $600, the course wouldn't work for him, and he'd go back to being a dishwasher with $200 instead of $800. But here's the thing. He was already a dishwasher. He was already living paycheck to paycheck. So his downside was returning to exactly where he already was, minus $600. That's it. That's the entire downside. His upside was potentially learning a skill that could 10 times his income within a year. Within a year. Not 30 years, 1 year. That's asymmetric risk. That's smart risk. Small, contained downside. Massive, exponential upside. Was it comfortable? Absolutely not. Did he eat ramen noodles for those 2 weeks? Yes. Did he feel scared? Of course. But he did it anyway because he understood the math. 6 months later, he had a junior developer job making $45,000 a year. From minimum wage to $45,000 in 6 months. 18 months after that, he was making $75,000. 3 years later, he was building trading algorithms and managing a 6-figure account. The smart risk wasn't the $600. The smart risk was understanding that his current trajectory was the actual risk, and disrupting it with intelligent action was the safer play long term. Now, let me give you another way to see this. Imagine you're in a prison. Not a literal prison, but the prison of your current financial situation. The prison of living paycheck to paycheck. The prison of being stuck. And you've been told your whole life there are 2 ways out of this prison. You can dig a tunnel with a spoon, which is slow and safe, or you can try to jump the wall, which is fast and reckless. Those are your 2 options. Most prisoners, most people in your situation, they try the spoon. They dig every single day for 30 years, saving a little here, cutting expenses there, slowly, painfully digging, and some of them make it. Some of them dig for 30 years and they get out. They retire with a modest amount. But most of them die digging. Most of them spend their entire lives in that prison, digging with a spoon, and they never actually escape. A few desperate ones, they try jumping the wall. They take some crazy risk, they gamble everything on a long shot, and they break their legs. They lose everything, they get thrown in solitary, they end up worse than where they started. But what if there's a third way? What if you study the guard rotations? What if you notice they change shifts at 3 in the morning? What if you realize there's a 10-minute window when one specific door is unwatched and you can quietly walk out? That's not jumping the wall. That's not digging with a spoon. That's intelligence applied to risk. You're still taking risk. If you're caught walking out that door, there are consequences. But you're taking smart risk where the probability of success is dramatically higher because you've done the work to understand the system. Most people building wealth from nothing think they have to choose between the spoon and the wall, between 40 years of saving or gambling, everything on a long shot. But smart risk is the third option. It's understanding the system well enough that your aggressive move is actually low risk because it's informed, it's timed, and it's positioned correctly. It's not safer because it's slow. It's safer because it's smart. So what makes risk smart versus stupid? What's the actual framework that lets you move aggressively without being reckless? Let me break this down for you because once you see this distinction, you'll never confuse motion with progress or caution with wisdom again. First, you need to understand there are 3 types of risk. Most people lump all risk together. They think risk is risk. But that's not true. There's stupid risk, mediocre risk, and smart risk, and they're completely different animals. Let me explain each one. Stupid risk is high downside, low upside. This is gambling your rent money at a casino. This is trading with no plan, hoping you get lucky. This is taking out a loan for something that doesn't produce income, like a fancy car or a vacation. Stupid risk feels exciting in the moment. It gives you a rush. It feels like you're doing something, but it's structurally terrible math. Your downside is massive. You could lose everything. And your upside is limited or barely positive. That's stupid risk. And most people who are desperate, who are scared, who are impatient, they fall into stupid risk because it feels like action. But it's not intelligent action. It's just motion. Mediocre risk is balanced downside and upside. Most conventional investing falls into this category. Stocks, bonds, mutual funds. You might make 7% annually. You might lose 7%. It's balanced. It's reasonable. It's what financial advisors tell you to do. And if you have 40 years and consistent capital to compound, it works beautifully. It really does. But if you're starting from almost nothing, mediocre risk keeps you mediocre. It's too slow to matter. If you have $500 and you put it in an index fund and it grows at 7% a year, you know what you have in 10 years? Maybe $1,000. That's not life-changing. That's not wealth building. That's treading water with inflation. Smart risk is limited downside and exponential upside. This is asymmetric. Your worst-case scenario is contained and manageable. Your best-case scenario is transformative. The dishwasher spending $600 on a coding boot camp? That's smart risk. Worst case, he's out $600 and he goes back to dishwashing. He's already a dishwasher, so his downside is really just $600. Best case, he learns a skill that changes his income trajectory forever. That's a 1 to 100 risk-reward ratio or better. That's asymmetric. That's smart. Smart risk requires you to think clearly about downside, not catastrophize it, not ignore it, actually calculate it. What's the true worst case here, and can I survive it? If the answer is yes, and the upside is exponentially larger than the downside, that's smart risk. But most people never get here because they can't separate fear from math. They feel scared, so they think the risk must be bad. But fear and math are different things. Now, here's the reframe that changes everything. You're not primarily risking money. You're primarily risking time. Most people don't understand this. They protect money like it's the scarcest resource. But money is renewable. If you lose $1,000, you can make another $1,000. It might take a month, 3 months, a year, but it's possible. You can earn money again. Time is not renewable. If you waste 10 years on the wrong path, you can't get those 10 years back. They're gone forever. You can't earn more time. You can't save time. You can only spend it. And once it's spent, it's gone. Most people protect money like it's scarce and spend time like it's infinite. But the reality is exactly opposite. Time is your scarcest resource. Money is abundant. It's literally being created every second by billions of people everywhere. There's more money in circulation today than yesterday. There will be more tomorrow than today. Money is abundant. Time is not. So when you're evaluating risk, the question isn't just how much money could I lose? The question is how much time am I losing by not taking this risk? If you stay in a minimum wage job for 10 years because you're afraid to invest in learning a new skill, you haven't saved money. You've wasted 10 years of earning potential. Let me say that again. You've wasted 10 years of the one non-renewable resource you have. That's catastrophic risk disguised as safety. That's the worst risk you can take, and you don't even realize you're taking it. Smart risk inverts this. Smart risk says, I will spend small amounts of renewable capital, money, to buy compressed learning timelines, courses, mentors, tools, so that I don't waste large amounts of non-renewable capital, time, on the wrong path. This is the psychology of wealth building from nothing. You're not protecting money, you're protecting time. And the way you protect time is by spending money intelligently to compress your learning curve. Now, when you have no money, information becomes your primary asset. This is so important. The dishwasher didn't have capital, but he had information. He knew coding boot camps existed. He knew junior developers made decent money. He knew the skill was learnable in weeks, not years. That information let him take smart risk. Without that information, spending $600 on random things would have been stupid risk. But with information, it became smart risk. This is why your first investment should never be capital deployed into markets. It should be capital deployed into your own learning. Because information compounds. Once you know something, you can't unknow it. Once you've learned a skill, you carry it forever. That's permanent leverage. Most people skip this step. They want to start trading, investing, building businesses immediately. But they're operating from an information deficit, which means every risk they take is structurally stupid because they don't know what they don't know. Smart risk starts with information acquisition. Read obsessively. Learn from people ahead of you. Understand the system you're about to operate in. Then when you deploy capital, it's informed deployment. Your risk is smart because it's educated. And educated risk has a dramatically higher success rate than impulsive risk. And this brings me to the foundation of everything. Wealth building from nothing requires you to find asymmetric opportunities where your downside is negligible and your upside is exponential. This asymmetry exists everywhere if you know how to see it. Learning a high-value skill has low downside, the cost of learning, and high upside, a lifetime income increase. Starting a service business with sweat equity has low downside, just time invested, and high upside, infinite if it works. Trading with proper risk management has low downside, 1% of your account per trade, and high upside, 10 times or more on good setups. But here's where people fail. They chase symmetry. They take a job that pays $40,000 a year instead of $30,000, and they think they're winning. That's a 33% increase. That sounds good, but it's still linear. It's still trading time for money. You work more hours, you make a bit more money. That's not wealth building. That's just slightly better poverty. Smart risk is about finding exponential opportunities, not linear ones. And exponential opportunities always have asymmetric risk profiles. Small downside, massive upside. That's the pattern you're looking for. Train your eye to see it, and suddenly opportunities are everywhere. They're in skills you could learn. They're in businesses you could start with no capital. They're in relationships you could build with people ahead of you. They're in markets you could learn to trade. Asymmetry is everywhere once you know what you're looking for. Okay, so you understand the types of risk. You understand the time versus money calculation. You understand the role of information in the asymmetry principle. But how do you actually apply this? What are the concrete steps you can take starting today with almost nothing? Let me give you the practice. Practice 1 is what I call the downside audit. Right now, take whatever risk you're currently afraid to take. Starting a business, learning a new skill, making an investment, changing careers, whatever it is. And write down the actual worst-case scenario. Not your catastrophized fear version where you end up homeless and everyone laughs at you. The realistic worst case. Be specific. If you invest $500 in learning to trade and it goes to zero, what's the actual impact? You're out $500 and you spent time learning. Can you survive that? Almost certainly yes. This practice forces you to separate fear from reality. Most risks people avoid have manageable downsides that feel catastrophic because they've never calculated them clearly. They've never written them down and looked at them objectively. Fear lives in the vague. Fear lives in the what if. When you make it concrete, when you write down exactly what the worst case is, it usually shrinks. It becomes manageable. And once you see the downside is manageable, the risk becomes much easier to take. Practice 2 is the upside calculation. Now write down the best case scenario if this risk works. Be honest but optimistic. If you learn to trade, what's possible in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years? If the upside is 10 times, 50 times, 100 times your downside, That's asymmetric. That's smart risk territory. That's where you should be focusing your energy. If the upside is only 2 times your downside, that's mediocre risk. It's probably not worth it when you're building from nothing. You need asymmetry to compress timelines. This calculation forces you to only pursue truly asymmetric opportunities. It eliminates half measures that waste your time. Because when you're starting from almost nothing, you don't have time for half measures. You don't have time for things that might work a little bit. You need things that could work massively, or you need to know quickly they don't work so you can move on. Practice 3 is the time cost calculation. This is the one most people never do, and it's the most important. Calculate what not taking this risk costs you in time. If you don't learn this skill, don't start this business, don't make this change, where will you be in 5 years? Be honest. You'll probably be exactly where you are now, maybe slightly better through incremental raises, if you're lucky. Now, compare that to where you could be if the smart risk works. If you learn to code, start a business, learn to trade, whatever it is, where could you be in 5 years if it works? The gap between those two futures is what you're actually risking by not acting. Most people never do this calculation, which is why they protect $1,000 while wasting 10 years. They think they're being careful with money, but they're being reckless with time. Do the math. It'll clarify everything. When you see that not taking the risk costs you 5 years of your life living in the same situation, suddenly the $600 doesn't feel like such a big risk anymore. And that's the framework. Smart risk isn't about being reckless. It's about being ruthlessly clear about downside, upside, and time cost. It's about finding asymmetric opportunities and having the courage to act when the math makes sense, even if the fear doesn't. Because the fear will always be there. Fear is not a signal that you shouldn't do something. Fear is just information that you're stepping outside your comfort zone. And if you're building wealth from almost nothing, you need to step outside your comfort zone. That's where growth happens. That's where transformation happens. Let me bring this all together for you. You came here thinking wealth building from almost nothing was either impossible or required you to gamble recklessly. And what I've shown you is that there's a third path, a path built on smart risk. Asymmetric opportunities where your downside is limited and your upside is exponential. Where you're not risking capital carelessly, you're deploying it strategically. Where you're not wasting time being overly cautious and you're not wasting time being recklessly impulsive. You learned about the 3 types of risk: stupid, mediocre, and smart. You learned that time is your scarcest resource and capital is renewable. You learned that information is leverage and that your first investment should be in learning, not capital deployment. You learned the asymmetry principle, that wealth from nothing requires finding opportunities with small downsides and massive upsides. And you learned the practical steps. Audit your downside, calculate your upside, measure your time cost. Having almost nothing isn't a handicap. It's a clarity filter. It forces you to think intelligently about risk because you can't afford to be sloppy. It gives you permission to be aggressive because you're not protecting a fortune, you're building one. An aggression backed by intelligence, by information, by asymmetric thinking. That's not gambling, that's smart risk. And smart risk, repeated consistently with learning and adjustment, is how you compress 40-year timelines into 4-year timelines. Here's what I want you to carry with you. Say this out loud if you can. I am not trapped by having nothing. I am freed by having nothing to protect and everything to build. My scarcity is not my prison. It's my permission to take smart risks others can't. I don't need luck. I need clarity. I don't need capital. I need courage backed by intelligent calculation. I will not confuse safety with stagnation, and I will not confuse risk with recklessness. I am building wealth from almost nothing, and almost nothing is exactly where the smartest builders begin. Let that reframe settle in your chest. You're not behind. You're not disadvantaged. You're at the starting line where every advantage, speed, flexibility, focus is available to you if you're willing to see it. The person with nothing has nothing to protect and everything to gain. That's freedom. That's power. Most people with wealth don't have that. They're protecting, defending, trying not to lose. You're creating, building, trying to gain. And creation always moves faster than preservation. If this perspective landed, if something shifted in how you see your situation, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment and tell me what's one smart risk you've been avoiding because you confused it with stupid risk? What's one asymmetric opportunity you're finally ready to pursue? Your story inspires others. Your courage gives permission to people who are exactly where you are right now. When you share your journey, you help someone else take their first step. And if you want more of this, frameworks that reframe wealth building, risk, and psychology in ways that actually work when you're starting from zero, subscribe, not because I need the numbers, but because you need the reminders. These perspectives are easy to forget when fear shows up, when doubt creeps in, when well-meaning people tell you to play it safe. I'll be here, every video, reminding you that smart risk exists, that you're capable of it, and that wealth from almost nothing isn't a fantasy, it's a formula. You don't need money to build wealth. You need clarity, courage, and a framework for distinguishing smart risk from stupid risk. You have all three now. The question is, will you use them? Will you do the downside audit? Will you calculate the upside? Will you measure the time cost? Will you take that first smart risk even though you're scared? Because I promise you, the regret of not trying is worse than the pain of trying and failing. At least when you try and fail, you learn something. When you don't try, you just stay stuck. And staying stuck is the most expensive risk of all. Go take your smart risk. See you in the next one.